You're listening to the Write Project podcast and radio program, a show about writing and modern Newfoundland author culture. This program is produced and recorded at CHMR FM 93.5 FM in St. John's, Newfoundland and Labrador, and is aired on other great stations in the province and elsewhere in the country. It can also be heard online at www.chmr.ca. I'm your host, Matthew LeDrew. Welcome to a very special episode of the Write Project podcast. Today, we've got a host of authors on to answer one of the most frequent questions that's asked of any author. We're asking them, if you could tell your younger writing self any one thing, what would it be? And today to answer, we have on Yasmine Dalloul, one of the authors featured in Mythology from the Rock. Yasmine, if you could go back in time and tell your younger writing self any one thing, what would it be?
Oh my God. I would tell her to stay away from marketing in the future. Be like, oh, actually, you know what? I would tell her that, that's a hard question.
Yeah, I like your answer. Stay away from marketing. That might be the advice I'd give my younger self too.
Yeah, I would say, you know what? Stick to working on your poetry and your little stories and writing in your journal. Put down the teen magazine because that's what my ad voice is. I'm always thinking about what I used to see in teen and 17 when I was like a teenager and an adolescent, and I tell her to just like, keep reading and keep writing, I guess.
Okay. So are all your ads like top 10 lists, like 10 things he wants you to do in bed and stuff like that? Is that...
Listicles were listicles do come easy to me, but I'm talking more of like Facebook ads, when there was more room to be creative with them, or just banners. I'm always just thinking about, remember those like page of, when it just says something like same day gourmet.
Yeah,
where did
I miss that. Yeah, that's fair. That's fair. I do miss those. I used to use those a lot for the book company, and they'd always be very strange. Like it would always be like, let's crop this banner so that it looks more interesting than it is, and then when you click on it, it's just my books. You know what I mean?
They're also great for collages.
They are. They're really fun. Yeah. All right, great answer. Thank you very much. Next on the line, we have Candice Osborn, best-selling author of Dark Tides and Killer Me. Candice, if you could tell your younger writing self any one thing, what would it be?
I would tell myself to not compare myself to other authors, because I did that at first, and that's how I learned that lesson. Okay. That's good. Yeah. Perfect.
Thank you very much. Next up, we have Susan Flanagan, the breakthrough author of Supermarket Baby, an amazing new novel from Flanker Press. Susan Flanagan, if you could tell your younger writing self any one thing, what would it be?
That if I have a character who is unlikable, I have to step back from the writing and look at that character's past and get to know him or her better so that I can make the character sympathetic to the reader. So I think the first two novels I wrote, I had an unsympathetic character, and people told me, but it actually took a couple of years before it really sank in, and that I could step back and say, okay, now I know how to fix this character to make readers like him, because otherwise they wouldn't have continued reading.
No, for sure. So do you consider the main character from Supermarket Baby to be like an unlikable character, or no?
I was referring to two books previous to Supermarket Baby, but Henry, I did have people who read it, my beta readers, who said, why does Millie stay with him? And I liked Henry from the outset. And then I had to think, ooh. And so I actually went back, and the first so many pages are their backstory, how they meet as students at Memorial, and Millie just thinks it's in the stars that they're a couple and they stay together and they're meant to be. But yeah, a lot of people did question, like, this smart lawyer, what's she doing with this guy who can't go to the store and buy 4 dozen eggs without trauma?
That's interesting, because there's a phenomenon with that in writing in Western culture. And everyone's mileage might vary, you know what I mean? Like, you might have one group of readers who's like, this person is unlikable, and there's another group of readers that says no. A good example, I'll give two, but one is Breaking Bad, where, like, you're supposed to hate Walter White by episode 6. Like, the writers are like, and this is the point where you're supposed to know that this is an unlikable person, and we're following the story, even you're supposed to not like him. Like, it's not a bug, it's a feature. But there were people that continued to like him for many seasons, and the writers were just losing their minds, being like, why are people still sympathetic towards this guy?
So that's interesting, because Walter's arc is from good to evil, where the
some people were shocked
arc,
about that in the last episode.
The traditional arc is someone who goes from flawed to less flawed. Yeah. So Henry, for example, in Supermarket Baby, he's a deeply flawed human, but we all are, right? But in the book, he learns that you have to let go of what you can't control, and he's perfecting his soul. So he's like Bill Murray in Groundhog Day. Like, he can't wait to get to February 3rd, but he doesn't realize what he has, that he has a wife and a son who love him. He's got life pretty good. He's had to retire. He can't go golfing with his buddies, but it takes him to the end of the book to sit back and say, like, I've got a good life.
Yeah. That makes sense. That makes perfect sense. The other example is that I was going to give was Homer Simpson, actually, like, because he is on paper, especially in the first 10 seasons of The Simpsons, which is all anyone ever watched, like, an unlikable human, only redeemed by Marge. Like, okay, she's a decent human being and she likes him, and so that's the only thing that, like, the writers thought redeemed him, kind of thing. And it's interesting that, like, how tastes change, that, like, when you're writing a story about, like, a lovable idiot, like, who has, like, a more together spouse, people instead of go like, oh, well, she likes him, so I like him, kind of thing. But now it's like, why is she with him? Which people did, in fairness, ask of Marge back in the day.
Yeah. I thought I had a question. A question for book clubs at the end of the book that touched on that. I have Henry describes Millie as a pit bull in her work and a puppy dog with the save the world gene whenever someone is downtrodden. Does this explain how Millie ended up with Henry? And I don't think it does, because as you'll see from chapter 1 and their backstory, that's not what it brought Millie to realize that Henry was her partner for life. But it could be, like in another novel, it could be that Henry is such a space cadet that he's like a case that needs to be saved.
You have questions for a book club in the back of your book?
Yes, 17 of them.
Odd. Interesting. Okay.
Yeah. It's the first one is the entire action of the novel takes place in a 2-week period, just like Dash's favorite game, Fortnite. Did you find yourself rooting for Henry to survive the nightmare? Because the entire main action takes place in 2 weeks. So just as Dash is trying to survive a virtual zombie apocalypse in his video game, Henry is trying to survive 2 weeks in a torturous Newfoundland spring.
Interesting.
Thank you very much. Next on the line, we're pleased to have artist and photographer Kit Sora, the visionary artist behind Kit Sora, the Artobiography. If you could tell your younger photographer self any one thing, what would it be?
I guess just keep going.
as corny and overused as that sounds.
That's most people's.
Yeah, and that's the thing. Like, there's a lot of stuff that gets in the way. You know, they're not kidding when they say the whole starving artist life is a thing, because you don't make much money being an artist unless you got a crazy big break. But like, it's not about. For me, it was never about making money. Like I'm not a money-driven person. I just like doing what I'm doing.
Yeah.
So just keep on trekking.
Yeah.
Keep trekking on.
Thank you very much. Next on the line, we have
Dr. Lisa M. Daly, an aviation archaeologist who in the past was one of the editors on Flights from the Rock, a collection of aviation-inspired short stories from Engine Books, and now has a novella out in the Slipstreamers series called Navigating Stories. Lisa Daly, if you could tell your younger writing self any one thing, what would it be?
Keep writing. In high school, I wrote a fair bit. I was encouraged to write. And when I went to university, I sort of stopped writing. I wouldn't be able to give a reason why, but I just stopped writing fiction. I kept reading, but I stopped writing fiction myself and started to believe I couldn't write fiction, that I shouldn't write fiction. So I didn't. And it wasn't until years later that we started hosting a writing group in our house, myself and my husband, that I decided, you know what, I'm going to give this a try again. So I think the big thing would have been telling myself to keep writing, because I fell back into a lot of those old high school mistakes and had to kind of relearn how to write a little bit. But if I'd kept doing it, I would have been way ahead of where I am now.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Okay.
Thank you very much. Next on the line, we have independent author Jeff Kelland. Jeff Kelland, if you could tell your younger writing self any one thing, what would it be?
My younger writing self?
Yep.
Don't do anything else. That's what I tell myself. So whatever you're being dragged towards, other than the arts, because I'm a painter as well and a musician and songwriter, I really would like to go back and make sure I did nothing else but the arts instead of trying to get a quote-unquote real job. I would have a much bigger body of work behind me, and I'd like to think that my style in these arts would be a little more mature and developed. But you work with what you got, and there you go.
Thank you very much. Next on the line, we have
Jennifer Shelby, who is an Atlantic Canadian author. Jennifer Shelby, what advice would you give to your younger writing self, your younger self about writing, if you could go back in time and give your younger self some advice?
Oh, that's a big one. I'd probably just tell myself to keep writing. I think that's the best advice I've ever been given, and it's been given to me by a few different authors that I've met. So it has held true, and I think it would be that. Just keep writing. I did get discouraged and overwhelmed, early in my 20s, and I think that's kind of set me at a late start. And that's fine. That's my past. But I wish I had kept writing then instead of taking that long break.
For sure. And that's pretty common, actually, because I mean, like, you can't get better. But like, if your writing is flawed, and some people's is and some people's isn't, but like, you can't get better without writing it and then seeing the flaws and then moving forward. Like, there's no shortcut where it's like, well, if I just wait till I'm 30, then I'll be a good writer and I'll start. Like, no, you'll still actually be bad. Like, you got to get those bad books out before you can get to the good stuff.
Absolutely. That's the thing.
Yeah, you might as well get it out like when you're 8, so then everyone will forgive you.
Exactly. The stuff I wrote when I was 8 was just so brilliant.
Yeah. For an 8-year-old, it was great.
Yeah. People don't have great expectations for 8-year-olds, so there's that.
I remember I wrote like a little, like, what I thought was a novel, but it wasn't, when I was like 8. It was a novel about milk. And it was like 12 pages long, but like each page had a giant picture on it and then a few sentences. And I worked on it the entire like week
and I gave it to my like second grade or third grade teacher, and she read it in like 2 minutes, and I was just perturbed that like she liked it and it was great, but I was like, I can't believe you read that in 2 minutes. That took me all week. Not a great investment of time.
Yep. Even with the novella, if you think about it, because a lot of these novellas you can sit down and probably read in an afternoon if you've got it, and it takes us so much more than that to write them.
Oh, the return on time. Like I've had people read novels, like full, like 100,000 word novels, and come back the next day with them read. And I'm like, on the one hand, yay. But on the other hand, do you know how much time that took me? Savor it.
Imagine how filmmakers must feel, because it's literally, an hour and a half.
That represents years and sometimes decades of work. Yeah. Thank you very much.
Next on the line, we have Chelsea B., author of London Calling and Christmas Mornings. If you could tell your younger writing self any one thing, what would it be?
To relax. It will
You
calm.
can't curse.
Oh, I can't curse?
No.
Okay.
To relax.
I would tell myself to relax, because it will all come in time. There is no rush, because I kept feeling like this rush of like, I need to finish a book by the time I graduate high school, or I need to by the time I finish university, and it's like,
finish a book by the time you graduate high school. You psychopath. The average age of an author when their first novel is pushed is 52.
Yeah. My 14-year-old self was really worried about finishing it by the time I was 17. I did not do that.
No.
But, yeah, no, that was a big concern of, like, I need to do this as quickly as possible. Partially
before you get old.
Before I get old and my life is over when I'm 30. But, no, when, I think it was mostly, because I was very familiar with the traditional, traditional publishing route, and I knew it took a million years to get anything out.
That's fair. So you want to get out and start getting submissions out
Exactly.
now, because it would take a year before they even looked at it.
It would take,
And it can feel like a long time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Especially when you've only had 14 years of life experience. A year is like a million years.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Next on the line, we have
Andrew Peacock. If you could tell your younger writing self any one thing, what would it be?
I think I would. That's a tough one. My immediate reaction to it is to say I should have started writing earlier.
Sure.
You should have started writing earlier. But I was just watching a lecture by another writer, and he said that in the lecture, he said he couldn't understand how people wrote books when they were 20 because they hadn't lived enough. And in that vein, in some ways, I have no regrets about starting later, because I've done a lot of things.
Yeah.
And I've thought a lot about the way the world works. And I think all of that was preparation for writing. People ask me, my first book was a memoir, Creatures of the Rock. And people ask me, how long did it take you to write that? And the glib answer all the time was 35 years.
Yeah.
I had to live that book before I could write it. Yeah. So I think there's something to that there is some value to living some before you write.
For sure. As someone who wrote very young and I'm not old now by any means, but you know what I mean? Like who's been writing for a while. I'll say that I like my current stuff better, but that's always the case, I sometimes in my more melancholy moments, I will wish that the other stuff was no longer in print, the older stuff, but here we are.
It's an interesting question. It's an interesting dilemma, because there are also artists, and maybe writing is different than other art, but particularly in music, people tend to make their best music when they're young.
I will say that the stuff I wrote when I was young was the most emotionally raw, and I there was this kind of fearlessness and this kind of screw the world kind of like energy to it that I can't get back now. I'm more reserved.
That'll come back to you in 20 or 30 years when you don't care about anything.
Yeah, exactly. Once the kids have grown up, it will come.
Right. That's right.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense, actually.
Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah. I also, when I'm always cautious when I'm speaking to writing students to say that when I say a young writer, I don't necessarily mean someone who's young in age. I mean someone who is trying to write for the first time. And there are some mistakes that you will make regardless of if your first book is written at 16 or 60, you know?
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's a good point.
Thank you very much. Next on the line, we have Tracy Waddleton, who is from Trepassey, Newfoundland. She recently just put out a book through Breakwater Books called Send More Tourists, The Last Ones Were Delicious, which is a collection of absolutely wonderful and hilarious and surreal and dreamlike short stories. Tracy, if you could tell your younger writer self any one thing, what would it be?
Probably to write more and to not be afraid of writing and other people's opinions about writing. And also you're not going to make any money at this. So
get a backup
which
plan.
is kind of the reality. Get a backup plan, or try to come into some kind of inheritance and hold on to it for when you're older because you're going to need it. But
that's actually really funny. That's my go-to advice for young authors. Like, I'll get parents whose kids like to write come up to me and like, what should they take in school? And I'll say STEM, and they'll say, what do you mean? Science, technology, engineering, math? Because you can be a physicist who writes on the side, but I have yet to meet a writer who physicists on the side.
Yeah, it's true. It's true. It's I don't think anybody's in. I hope not. I hope I'm not in it for the money, and I don't think many people I know are in it for the money. I'm sure the really lucrative bestseller types, then maybe it's a different situation for them. But when you're not after hitting your market, you're after finding your stride, and you're sort of just trying to create what it is you want to create without pigeonholing yourself again into some genre, then you kind of have to let the idea of money go. But it's not really important to me. Writing is like a compulsion, and I do it anyway. So I might as well, try to publish and try to follow it in a bigger way in my life, because it is such a big part of my life. So I don't know, maybe you have to just take that kind of, non-monetary approach to the general way of things, and just be happy that you're sharing your art with people.
Absolutely.
And that's the best you can hope for.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you very much. Next we have Colleen Helm from Utah. She is the writer of the Shelby Nichols Adventures series, which started with Carrots way back 2011. Wow, it started way back in 2011. And to my knowledge, currently has 14 sequels. So it's quite the long-running series. Colleen Helm, if you could tell your younger writing self any one thing, yourself as a young writer, what would it be?
Oh, it would be believe in yourself and don't give up. Because I think as writers, we have so many self-doubts. We're always wondering if it's good enough. And, and it takes a lot to get your work out there and put it out there for people to tear down and all of that stuff. Yeah. But I would just say, you've got some good ideas, and no one else is gonna say that the way you are. That's even true. If they have the same kind of ideas, you're the only one that can say it the way you say it. So go for it.
That's true. That's good advice. I like that. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Next on the line, we have JRH Lawless, author of the novel Always Greener. Jay, if you could tell your younger writing self any one thing, what would it be?
Just don't feel like you're under that pressure to, constantly produce. People say you're not a writer if you don't write every day. That's rubbish. But, just to keep going at the pace that works for you, because at the end of the day, all that matters is that it works. And you can do it. Anybody can do it. I've done it. So if I can do it, absolutely anybody can do it.
Yeah.
And you know, it's something that is feasible, but at the same time, it's a you know, it's a real process. It's not, you know, I've done it now and boom. You know, it's not because always greener. You know, I got that banner on you know, #1 bestseller on Amazon. That, you know, that's it now. You know, it's not how it works at all. You're constantly learning, constantly growing as an author, both in craft, in knowledge of the profession, of the industry, and growing in friends. You grow with the people that you learn, the community that you learn from.
Absolutely. Perfect. Thank you very much. On the line now we have Kelley Power, contributing author to Chillers from the Rock and What's Written in the Ladies. Kelley Power, if you could tell your younger writing self any one thing, what would it be?
It would be to try and keep your writing practice going, even if it's just a little hint, and mainly fiction, throughout your years of work. I would like to tell myself that would be a worthwhile endeavor. I put that on the back burner for many, many, many years, and, you know, I suppose I don't regret it, because obviously I did it contextually with whatever was going on at the time, but yeah, don't let that fiction writing bug go untended.
Yeah. I agree, and you can chip away. You can do 500 words a day or less. You know what I mean? Like,
for sure.
Yeah. Thank you. Next on the line, we have Amanda Labonte, author of the Call of the Sea and Supernatural Causes series. Amanda, if you could tell your younger writing self any one thing, what would it be?
Oh, probably to write more faster.
Yeah.
To get out of, and it goes back to that whole thing of letting the demons get in your head and tell you that what you're doing isn't any good. And I think that I feel like I spent a lot of time explaining to myself why I shouldn't write, as opposed to just putting my head down and doing it. But that's, I think, a problem for a lot of artists. But if I could, I would go back and probably try and convince myself that I could. I didn't need to take 7 years to do one book, as an example. Also, the other thing I would have done is I would have reached out to creative writing classes sooner, because I came from a background of I did an arts degree in university. I worked as a student journalist and then a freelance journalist, and so I had this idea that I knew how to write. So when I was writing story creatively, my assumption was that there was something wrong with the idea, when in fact I just had to retrain my brain to work from a creative writing perspective. So I would have actually gone, I went through creative writing classes and workshops. I would have done that sooner, definitely, because that's how you find your people.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And community is important for being a writer.
For sure. And you don't think it because it seems like a solitary activity, but it's so important.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. I think I would have gone back, and not that it's about me, but I think I would have, I think if I started writing pretty young, so I don't kind of want to reset the clock on that. I always think I wish I could go back to when I was younger, even as young as 7 or 8, and convince myself to not watch TV, but to read books. I wish I was more well-read than I am, and there's not enough hours in the day.
Yeah, I mean, reading, though, is, I'm home right now, and I should be writing, and I have a bunch of books that I haven't read, and I'm just picking them up because, you reading is important to writing, but I'll pick up to read a chapter, and then go back to my writing, and then 5 chapters later, I've completely immersed in a book and not doing any writing. So, I was a reader as a kid, so I think there's a balance there too. I was the kid who wanted to write but read all the time.
For sure. All right, well, thanks for coming on again. For all of you, we'll be here again next week at 4:30 Newfoundland time or online at chmr.ca. Please tune in and we'll talk more about writing culture in Newfoundland.